Hello, I'm coming to you from Australia, and this video is going to outline the corporate takeover of our food systems. In this video, I will be outlining the attack small farmers are under globally and what sense we can make of this. I'm going to focus on the global agricultural changes affecting how our food is grown, and which rely heavily on lab-grown, hydroponic, artificial intelligence and GMO technologies. I'll demonstrate that the essence of what is going on is centralised control of our food systems by the wealthiest and largest global corporates hiding behind a public relations spin. To give some context for this assertion, the forces behind the agricultural changes use the United Nations to justify their methods and their takeover. The United Nations has 17 strategic development goals to be implemented by 2030. And the two goals that are primarily misused for the agricultural changes are number 2, zero hunger, and number 13, climate action. The other main player to be aware of is the World Economic Forum, which is made up of 1,000 plus corporations, the biggest and the wealthiest players in the world. In 2019, the World Economic Forum and the United Nations signed a strategic partnership to implement the 2030 goals. And I'm going to return later in this video to spell out the crossovers and the implications. For now, I'm going to focus on what is happening around the world with our food production. We're told daily we're in a global food crisis, and some causes attributed a war in Ukraine, the measures governments all around the world put in place during the COVID saga, which disrupted food chains, climate crisis, inflation, and rising costs of living. You'd assume that as we are in a food crisis, our governments will be doing all in their power to support local farmers with the aim to stabilise our food supplies. Yet, when we take a look around the world, we see the opposite. We see small farmers under threat in many countries. So I'm going to take you through a few examples, both globally and then within Australia. So here we are, Dutch farmers. Why are Dutch farmers protesting over emissions? So this is dated June 28th, but this is still ongoing, these protests. Farmers protested around the Netherlands as lawmakers voted Tuesday, so this is a couple of weeks ago, on proposals to slash emissions of damaging pollutants, a plan that will likely force farmers to cut their livestock herds or to stop work altogether. Over to New Zealand. New Zealand's agricultural emissions pricing system sparks protest groundswell, and that's mid-June. New Zealand could become the first country in the world where farmers have to pay for their livestock emissions. Steve Cranston is a dairy farmer near Hamilton and is part of an organisation called Groundswell, which is against the farming tax. There is no support from grassroots farmers in New Zealand for this tax, he told ABC Rural. By 2030, a lot of farmers will be paying $15,000 to $50,000 for this tax, and it's going to cause a huge amount of damage. A lot of these guys will just be forced out of business. He said it's disappointing that industry groups were not backing farmers and have been sucked into this line that farmers are adding to climate change. We come over to Greece. So this is March 19th, 2022, hit by high costs. Greek farmers staged tractor protest. And we go down to see what it's about. Farming associations say they were largely left out of a 1.1 billion euro financial support package announced early this week by the government to help struggling businesses and lower income households. Huge rises in energy costs have hit farmers who've passed many of the increases onto food prices. Now we're coming to Australia. This is the Northern Territory. Tragedy. Aussie MPs heartbreak over a $2,000 a week job nobody wants. So workers can pocket $400 a day for just 6 hours of work, but Aussies are turning their backs on this crucial and lucrative job. So if we go down to see what this is about, posting a picture of healthy orange trees laden with fruit, an MP pointed out that while the scene appeared to be incredibly productive, it was in fact a tragedy in the making. That's because at the moment there's not enough workers available to pick this season's bumper crops, leaving ripe fruit to simply rot away on the ground. If you come down, the problems, part of what's going on with this is the problems plaguing the nation's fruit industry is nothing new. But the situation is severely worsened due to the COVID pandemic and border shutdowns, which saw backpackers leave the country in droves. Now we come to New South Wales. Farmers say rule changes to pick your own businesses and roadside stalls could send them broke. Businesses that run roadside fruit stalls and pick your own farms fear new regulations proposed by the New South Wales government could shut them down. So this is a farmer talking. His own business would not be viable if he had to reduce the number of days he's open to just 10 a year. So these are the changes being proposed, and restrict the number of people coming in to pick your own fruit to 50 a day. We're open for about 7 months of the year on Saturdays and Sundays. And another regulation stipulating businesses must be of a certain size is also a serious problem. They're saying that you can't operate a pick your own unless you have a 25-hectare farm. Our farm is only 16 hectares and has been a viable enterprise. Over to bees, and this is again in New South Wales. Bee varroa mite outbreak set to cost beekeepers millions of dollars as government works to control the spread. New South Wales beekeepers and industry groups say emergency measures implemented to stop the spread of a deadly parasite will devastate the industry and have potentially significant knock-on effects on honey production and agriculture in general. So what you can hear stated by the farmers, if you read the articles and other articles that there are around, is that they're not being listened to. They're pleading and saying, you know, we're not being asked. These are rules that are going to cause us to lose our livelihoods and our farms. And I find it rather strange that in a time of food insecurity, our farmers' livelihoods are under such sustained attack. So another threat that I think we need to keep our eyes upon is this sort of narrative that is starting to come up in the media. Green fingers, urgent warning to gardeners as soil increases risk of killer heart disease. Gardeners have been warned that their habit could leave them at an increased risk of heart disease. Medics found that pollutants in the soil could have a detrimental effect on the cardiovascular system. So whilst the narrative being espoused is that animals, plants, and our soil are dangerous, there's a whole new agricultural industry being rolled out. And this agricultural industry is extensively lab-grown, hydroponic, and genetically modified. And I'm going to take you through a few examples of what is on the horizon. So we have here massive cricket processing facility comes online in London, Ontario. In the next few days, the first farmed insects will arrive at a new massive cricket processing facility in London. At full capacity, Aspire's Food Group's facility is expected to house 4 billion crickets and produce 13 million kilos of the insect each year at what is believed to be the biggest cricket-specific processing facility in the world. And this week, the American federal government announced it was investing up to $8.5 million into the facility. The plant comes with lofty goals. The chief executive officer hopes it will help tackle the planet's food insecurity problems. We go over here, cricket, same factory, cricket protein facility named Top Artificial Intelligence Project. This plant is being designed as a largely automated, artificially intelligent powered facility, leveraging technologies including artificial intelligence, robotics, and automated storage and retrieval to optimize the cricket farming process and maximize yield. Basically meaning there's not going to be very many workers. And here we got the World Economic Forum back in 2018 proposing that eating insects is going to be a really good thing for us. So we see it's got the World Economic Forum backing. Lab meat 2022. What exactly is lab meat? What is lab created meat or lab grown meat? Can you make meat without killing animals? The answer is yes. Lab created meat or cultured meat is basically the meat that grows in a lab instead of growing on an animal's body. Thanks to the scientists that are working on this technology, for the first time in human history, we'll be able to eat meat without actually killing or even hurting an animal. Isn't that cool? Now, just because I don't want to be spreading misinformation, we need to counter the fact that it doesn't harm an animal. Come over here, the gruesome truth about lab-grown meat. It's made by using fetal cow blood. Yes, all lab-grown meat so far requires a product called fetal bovine serum. And what is this? Why does it exist? Where does it come from? What else is it used for? And then it goes into a pretty grotesque explanation. It's a byproduct made from the blood of cow fetuses. If a cow coming for slaughter happens to be pregnant, the cow is slaughtered and bled, and then the fetus is removed from its mother and brought into a blood collection room. The fetus, which remains alive during the following process to ensure blood quality, has a needle inserted into its heart. Its blood is then drained until the fetus dies, a death that usually takes about 5 minutes. And the blood is then refined and the resulting extract is FBS. The future of agricultural gene editing, more herbicide-tolerant crops sooner. So this is CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R. And it's touted by Bill Gates. A new paper from Chinese scientists spells out the future of agricultural gene editing. In spite of claims from GMO promoters that gene editing will save us from climate change and reduce pesticide use, the paper tells us that what we can expect is just more of the same. GM herbicide-tolerant crops, this time produced with gene editing. And this will continue the trajectory of increased herbicide use resulting from the spread of GM herbicide-tolerant crops. But there are crucial differences with gene-edited crops, as the paper makes clear. The fact that some governments have deregulated some types of gene editing means that regulatory risk assessment won't be involved in these countries, making gene-edited GMOs faster to develop, more profitable, and potentially more hidden from consumers. We have GMO animals. This past Monday, we welcomed another GMO into our food supply, a new strain of beef cattle. This is the third animal to get approval from the United States Food and Drug Association, following the fast-growing aqua bounty salmon and pigs with more transplant-friendly organs. Vertical farming. Is this the future of agriculture? Because the World Economic Forum is asking that question, we can be assured it is. And vertical farming involves growing plants indoors in layers using LED lighting and controlled growing and nutrition systems. And Europe's biggest vertical farm already grows 1,000 tonnes of food a year. So if we come down and have a look at what it looks like, this is what we're going to be eating food from. And because that looks incredibly undigestible and not appealing, I think, to the majority of people, the way they justify this is through the amount that it uses less water and less space to grow the same amount of crops. Farmers without a farm, ABC News. This was in January, how agriculture is moving indoors to benefit the outside world. 2 acres of production in a 40-foot space. This is in Hobart. Using LED lights and hydroponic nutrients, the farm grows lettuce, leafy greens, Asian greens, herbs, root vegetables, and flowering plants. I don't have to worry about floods, wind, wallabies, electric fences turning the soil over, Mr. Handy said. Using 95% less water than traditional farming, the farm ticks the box environmentally. I mean, this is definitely not the answer to food sustainability in the world, but it's definitely a part of it, Mr. Hardy said. Changing the nature of the world. Science writer Julian Cribb believes that a world food crisis is imminent due to a combination of loss of water, loss of topsoil, climate change, and overuse of poisons. We're going to need to change the nature of the way we produce food and change the human diet at the same time. Once upon a time, you had to have a lot of soil and a lot of water to be a big food producer. Now you don't. You just need the technology and the expertise. Mr. Cribb said new urban farming methods would see most of the world's great cities feeding themselves. And I just want you to note the change between farming. We're changing from language of farming, from soil, from traditional farming methods. And what it's going to be is technology and new expertise, changing the way we eat and the way we farm. So this is all being rolled out as part of the Great Reset. And the Great Reset is the baby of the World Economic founder and chairman, Klaus Schwab. It's focused on stakeholder capitalism, which is a fancy way of saying corporates will be in charge, but that's no problem because we can trust they'll look after us. It's based on environmental, social, and governance metrics. and reliance on the fourth industrial revolution for public good. And you can go to the World Economic Forum website to find out what all of those things are. And I suggest you do, because they're rolling them out as we speak. While the World Economic Forum uses fuzzy words about stakeholder capitalism and corporate responsibility, the true aim of the World Economic Forum is to make money and centralise control and power. And when the top 4 corporations who dominate the world's seed, pesticide, and biotech industries are all connected to the World Economic Forum, we must take notice. So through the World Economic Alliance with the United Nations, corporates are misusing the 17 Strategic Development Goals to usher in technocratic approaches to agriculture, which they even more extensively profit from. And many are trying to raise the alarm regarding the corporate coup that's gone down in the United Nations. So in 2021, the United Nations held a food summit about how to, feed the world. Zero hunger, how are we going to get there? And so when you go to the United Nations and find out about the food summit, they'll say it was a wonderful enterprise. We had our Indigenous farmers there. We had small farmers there. We had all the global voices. It was about equity and access. It was transparent and blah, 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 all the normal languages. However, that's not how it went down. So The Guardian actually put an article out about it. Corporate colonization, small producers boycott UN food summit. Hundreds of civil society groups, academics, and social movements are boycotting the first UN Global Food Summit amid growing anger that the agenda has been hijacked by an opaque web of corporate interests. Called the People's Summit by UN organisers, groups representing thousands of small-scale farmers and Indigenous communities, which produce 70% of the world's food through sustainable agriculture, are among those to withdraw from Thursday's event, saying their knowledge and experience has been ignored. The declaration, signed by about 600 groups in individual states, we reject the ongoing corporate colonization of food systems and food governance under the facade of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. The struggle for sustainable, just, and healthy food systems cannot be unhooked from the realities of the peoples whose rights, knowledge, and livelihoods have gone unrecognised and disrespected. Some have criticised the prominence of corporations such as Nestle, Tyson, and Bayer in the summit's efforts to identify food system solutions. The UN has provided a cover of legitimacy for corporations to capture the narrative and deflate public pressure. And that's from Sophia Monsal, Food First Information and Action Network. So how it works is this is an example of how this corporate coup is unleashed. So they break the summit down into 5 areas, and one of those was called Boost Nature Positive Production. That was Action Track 3. It included one single Indigenous group, but 26 private sector corporations such as Nestle, Tyson, Bayer, and the International Fertilizer Association, looking at boosting nature positive production. So about 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is located on the territories of Indigenous peoples who have practiced sustainable agriculture for millennia, and who, along with small-scale farmers, are at the forefront in developing sustainable modern farming practices that work with nature and communities rather than exploiting them. And Nettie Webb from La Via Campesina, a global peasant movement representing small farmers, rural workers, and Indigenous farmers, said her organisation withdrew and started organising against the summit because it was deeply undemocratic, unaccountable, and dismissive of those without wealth and power. I just want to read a little bit from a book called The Great Reset and Its Health Dictatorship, and it's written by Harry, Harrie Salman. And it's under the subheading of control of food production. Changes in the global food supply provide a very vivid example of the takeover by big corporations in all areas of sustainable development. The Indian activist Vandana Shiva has been denouncing this takeover for decades. With other Indian leaders, she founded the organisation Navdanya, In 1986, which campaigns for biodiversity, organic farming, farmers' rights, and the protection of seeds. On November the 9th, 2020, an article was published in which Vandana Shiva gave her opinion on the Great Reset. She noted, "The Great Reset is about multinational corporate stakeholders at the World Economic Forum controlling as many elements of planetary life as they possibly can." She added, "It's about maintaining and empowering a corporate extraction machine and the private ownership of life." So it's encroaching on us. It's becoming at the point where they're going to be in control of every facet of our lives. So what we are seeing here, I'm spelling out to you, we first of all need to know what we're up against. This is not being done primarily at a government level. There is a global force behind it, and it needs to be located. So we need to have our eye and our finger on the pulse of what's coming next. This is the first video I'm making on this subject. I will come and I will hone in on certain players in particular and their allegiance to the World Economic Forum and how they've created agricultural dominance in the past and what's happening for them in the future. And I will spell particular examples out. This video, I wanted to give a very broad overview so people start to realize that what we're seeing is not happening on just a state or federal level. It's not our particular government. It is coming from a global arena, and it's happening all around the world. So first of all, we need to understand what we're dealing with before we can come up with the solutions. Our local farmers are under threat from global interests, and we must position ourselves in this understanding so we can pitch our energy at disrupting this global corporate coup. We must understand that what we are seeing surpasses any country's government. We must understand the narrative they have created, which serves to smokescreen their true intentions. There are many options for growing our food in a way which protects and supports our beautiful planet, which doesn't rely on scientific methods divorced from natural processes. And there are many people and farmers focused on this around the world. So get to know your local farmers in your area and keep an eye on what they're up against. Reach out to them and see how you can best support them. And we need to work together.